What happened when my son's girlfriend said, "I used to be a boy"? I was chopping vegetables in my kitchen while my middle son's new girlfriend Sadie helped with dinner prep, making small talk about her wrestling days growing up. She'd been so shy all evening, barely speaking to anyone except our dog, staying hidden behind my son whenever possible. My first and third sons were super social and loved to party during their school years. My middle son focused on his grades and future from a young age. He moved out the youngest into his own home. My middle had a very bad ex-girlfriend. Basically, they dated since 17 and she cheated on him several times. My son never left because he loved her, but eventually he realized she was a bad woman and left her. Only took 8 years. My oldest got married at 29 and my youngest is engaged. They give my middle son a lot of crap because he is single. But I always say that his ex kind of messed up his sense of love and confidence. They don't understand what he went through. My husband agrees. 6 months ago, he started dating this new girl that we just met yesterday. I was happy to hear that he found someone. She is very educated and smart, according to him. They have similar personalities and interests. Considering my middle is kind of a nerd, that made me very happy to hear. Anyway, I wanted to meet her immediately. My son said that she is very shy and it would take her time. 6 months later, she told him that she is ready to meet us. So Friday afternoon, my husband decided to grill. Everyone comes over. Then my son and his new girlfriend show up. This beautiful girl walks in holding his hand and standing behind him. He was right. She is very shy. We all introduce ourselves and we will call her Sadie. Sadie was quiet but said hi to everyone. She honestly associated the most with our dog that night. My sons go out and help their dad cook. My daughter-in-law goes out with my grandbaby, and soon-to-be daughter-in-law and her are best friends, so they go out together. I ask if Sadie would like to help me finish the sides and chop some stuff. She says sure. I just ask how they met and typical conversations. Eventually my middle son comes in and comes up behind her, pokes her booty. She gives him a really look and hits in the arm and he grabs her and picks her up as they laugh. I say put her down, don't be so rough on her. My son just says okay, puts her down and goes back out. I said, sorry, 3 boys. Sometimes they are a little too rough, but he is harmless. She said, I know he is. I used to wrestle with my dad and brother growing up too. I said, your mom let her daughter wrestle her older brother and dad? She said, well, I used to be a boy, so I guess it was different. And giggled. I froze. The knife stayed in my hand while my brain tried to make sense of what just came out of Sadie's mouth. My fingers gripped the handle harder and I stared at the half-cut carrot on the cutting board. The kitchen felt too quiet except for the sizzling from outside where my husband was grilling. I could hear Sadie shifting next to me, probably wondering why I stopped moving. My hand started moving again, bringing the knife down through the carrot with a sharp crack against the board. Oh, that must have been fun. Wrestling with family came out of my mouth somehow while my brain was still stuck on those 5 words she just said. The knife kept moving up and down, faster now, turning the carrot into perfect little circles that I didn't even need this small. Sadie relaxed next to me and started talking about her brother teaching her different holds and how her dad would referee their matches in the basement. Her voice got lighter and she laughed about the time she accidentally gave her brother a bloody nose with an elbow. I nodded and kept chopping, moving to the celery now, making myself focus on each cut while she told me about winning against boys twice her size in middle school. My hands worked on their own while my mind raced through every interaction I'd seen between her and my son tonight. The way she stood behind him, how she barely spoke, the soft way she touched his arm. Is the corn ready yet? My husband's voice boomed from the back door and I jumped, nearly dropping the knife. The corn sat in the pot on the stove, probably overcooked by now. I grabbed the handles with the pot holders, my hands shaking just enough that some hot water splashed on the counter. We should head out and join everyone, I told Sadie, carrying the heavy pot toward the door. She grabbed the bowl of cut vegetables and followed me outside where everyone was gathering around the picnic table. Walking across the patio, my mouth opened to ask something about when she knew or how long ago she changed, but I caught myself and swallowed the words back down. So what do you do for work? Came out instead, and she started telling me about her job at a tech company downtown while we set the food on the table. My oldest son was helping his wife get the baby settled in the high chair, and my youngest was stealing pieces of meat off the grill while his fiancé slapped his hand away. Everyone sat down and started passing food around while I watched them interact with Sadie, knowing I was the only one at this table who knew her secret. My youngest made a joke about something and Sadie smiled politely but didn't laugh. My oldest asked her about her college and she answered quietly, still mostly looking at her plate. Every word anyone said felt loaded now. Every comment about appearance or dating or the past made my chest tight. The dog kept pushing his nose against Sadie's leg under the table, begging for food, and she finally laughed for real when he licked her fingers after she snuck him a piece of chicken. That genuine sound loosened something in my chest and I took my first full breath since the kitchen. Sadie's got her master's degree. I heard myself saying too loudly and then couldn't stop. She graduated top of her class, works at that big tech company. Really impressive stuff. My middle son looked at me funny from across the table but didn't say anything. She's been to 12 countries, I added even though nobody asked and my husband touched my knee under the table. The meal went on forever with me jumping to fill every silence with facts about Sadie's education and career that my son had told me over the past months. Finally, people started getting up to leave and I practically ran to the kitchen with dirty plates just to have something to do with my hands. After the last car pulled away and the house got quiet, I stood at the sink washing dishes while my husband dried next to me. The words sat heavy in my mouth and finally spilled out. Sadie used to be a boy. The plate in his hand stopped moving and he set it down carefully on the counter. His mouth opened and closed a couple times before he picked the towel back up and started drying again. Slower now. We worked in silence for a few minutes, just the sound of water and clinking dishes between us. The back door opened and my middle son came in looking around the kitchen. Hey Mom, forgot my phone. Think I left it on the counter. He grabbed it and started to leave but stopped and turned back to me. You okay? You seemed kind of off during dinner. The concern in his voice made my chest squeeze and I had to look away from his face. Just surprised by something, but I'm fine, really. He walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. Sadie was really nervous about meeting you guys. I know she's quiet, but she really likes you already. The weight of what I knew pressed down harder and I managed to smile at him. She seems wonderful. I'm happy you found someone who makes you happy. He hugged me quick and headed back out to where Sadie was waiting in the car. The door clicked shut and I stood there holding the dish towel for a good 30 seconds before my legs started working again. My husband came in through the back door carrying the empty grill platter and asked if everything was okay since I looked pale. I told him I was surprised by something, but that I cared about our son and wanted him happy, keeping my voice steady while I dried the last pot. He set the platter down and wrapped his arms around me from behind, saying our middle son mentioned Sadie was really nervous about meeting us and asked if she seemed okay during dinner prep. The guilt hit me like a punch to the stomach knowing I probably made her first family dinner even harder by freezing up in the kitchen. Later that night after my husband fell asleep, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and typed transgender etiquette into Google, scrolling through article after article about pronouns and what questions not to ask and how to be supportive. The blue light from my phone screen lit up our bedroom while I read about dead naming and misgendering and transition timelines, making mental notes about everything I needed to avoid saying or doing. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I kept reading, finding parent support groups and educational resources, bookmarking pages about how to be an ally. The clock on my nightstand showed 2:47 a.m. when I finally put the phone down, but sleep wouldn't come. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly in the dark, thinking about those 8 years my middle son spent with that awful ex who cheated on him over and over, remembering how small his voice got when he finally told us about the third time he caught her, the way he blamed himself for not being enough, how he stopped going out with friends, stopped smiling the way he used to. Now he had someone who made him laugh again, someone educated and kind who clearly adored him, and the last thing I wanted was to mess that up by saying something stupid or making Sadie feel unwelcome in our family. The next morning, while my husband was in the shower, I called my oldest son under the pretense of asking about the baby's sleep schedule. After a few minutes of baby talk, I casually mentioned his company's diversity initiatives I'd read about online, asking what he thought about them. He went on for 10 minutes about his trans coworker Marcus, who ran their best development team, and how the guy was brilliant and funny, and everyone loved working with him. Relief washed over me hearing the genuine respect in his voice. No hesitation or judgment. Just talking about a colleague he clearly admired. My husband came downstairs for coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table while I explained everything Sadie had said and how I wanted to handle it. He stirred sugar into his mug slowly, processing, then reached across the table to squeeze my hand, saying we needed to let our son control who knew and when. We were a team in supporting him, whatever came next, and we'd follow his lead on sharing or not sharing with extended family. That afternoon, I pulled up my text messages and typed out a message to my middle son asking if he and Sadie wanted to grab coffee with just me sometime, something smaller and less overwhelming than a full family gathering. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again before his response came through filled with relief and gratitude, suggesting a coffee shop downtown for Tuesday morning. 3 days later, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, ordering my usual latte and finding a quiet corner table away from the morning rush. They walked in holding hands, Sadie in a pretty blue sweater that matched her eyes, my son protective and watchful beside her. We hugged hello and they got their drinks, settling into the chairs across from me while I fidgeted with my cup sleeve. I wanted to apologize for freezing up in the kitchen, I said, looking directly at Sadie. She smiled softly, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she told me she noticed, but understood it was a lot to process, that most people needed time to adjust. The conversation started flowing easier, talking about her job and their weekend plans, until my mouth opened and the worst possible question came out. Have you had the surgery? The words hung in the air and I immediately wanted to crawl under the table and disappear forever. Sadie's face stayed calm, but I saw her fingers tighten around her coffee cup before she gracefully redirected, explaining that she only shares what feels comfortable and that medical information was private for everyone. My son's hand moved to her knee under the table, a small gesture of support that made my chest ache with how protective he was of her. He cleared his throat and explained that he'd waited 6 months to introduce us because Sadie needed time to feel safe meeting parents after her own family completely rejected her when she came out. The casual way he said it, like mentioning the weather, while Sadie stared at her coffee cup, made my heart crack down the middle. Her own parents, her own family, just threw her away like she meant nothing. That evening, my husband grabbed 2 beers from the fridge and headed out to the garage where our middle son was looking at something on his phone. I watched from the kitchen window as they stood by the workbench, my husband asking in that casual dad way if his teasing about Sadie being quiet during dinner was okay, if he should dial it back. Our son's whole body relaxed as he laughed, saying he appreciated him asking, but it was totally fine, that Sadie actually thought it was funny and felt included rather than singled out. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was washing the last of the coffee mugs from our talk with Sadie. The family group chat had 3 new messages from my youngest making some dumb joke about women wrestlers being tougher than men. My chest got tight reading his words even though he had no idea what was really going on. I grabbed my phone and typed back quickly that we need to be respectful about people's bodies and what they like to do. 3 question marks popped up from him almost immediately, but I didn't back down. I added that jokes about people's interests weren't funny and left it at that. My oldest sent a thumbs up emoji, which made me feel less alone in this. I waited until my husband went to take a shower, then called my oldest privately. He picked up on the second ring and I told him there was sensitive stuff I couldn't share, but I needed his help setting a better tone in the family. He didn't push for details, which made me love him even more. He just said he'd keep things positive and help shut down any weird comments. About an hour later, my phone lit up with a text from my middle son thanking me for stopping the wrestling jokes in the group chat. He admitted he'd been terrified we would reject Sadie when we found out the truth. His message made my eyes water as I typed back that I loved them both. The next morning, my daughter-in-law came over with the baby for our usual Wednesday visit. She pulled me aside while the baby played with blocks on the living room floor. She asked quietly how she could make Sadie feel more welcome in the family. I shared the basics I'd learned from my late-night research about using the right pronouns and not asking personal questions about bodies. She nodded and took mental notes while bouncing the baby on her hip. Later that afternoon, while folding laundry, I kept thinking about how my son watched for any sign we might be mean to Sadie. His terrible ex had trained him to expect people to be cruel and judgmental for 8 long years. My hands gripped a towel harder as I promised myself to be consistently supportive no matter what. That evening over dinner, my husband suggested we plan a casual Sunday lunch with just immediate family. No extended relatives or neighbors who might say something wrong. I agreed and started mentally planning a simple menu that wouldn't stress anyone out. Sunday came faster than expected, and I spent the morning making sandwiches and cutting up fruit. Everyone arrived around noon, and we settled at the dining room table. The conversation flowed easily about work and the baby's new teeth coming in. Then our elderly neighbor knocked on the door holding a package that got delivered to his house by mistake. My husband invited him in for a minute, and he looked at everyone gathered around the table. His eyes landed on Sadie, and he made some comment about real women not doing rough sports like wrestling. My heart pounded hard in my chest as I quickly asked him about his tomato plants this year. He launched into a whole story about aphids while I guided him back toward the door. After he finally left, I went to find Sadie, who had stepped out onto the back patio. I asked if she was okay, and she thanked me for changing the subject so smoothly. She admitted those kinds of comments still hurt even after all this time. We sat down on the patio chairs and she started talking about her own parents. She told me they completely cut her off when she transitioned 5 years ago. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands shook slightly as she explained how chosen family literally saved her life. I reached over and squeezed her hand gently without saying anything. She squeezed back and we sat there for a minute before going back inside. My son met us at the door with worried eyes but relaxed when he saw us both smiling. The rest of lunch went smoothly with my oldest keeping conversation light and fun. My youngest even asked Sadie about her graduate program and seemed genuinely interested in her research. As they were leaving, my middle son hugged me extra long and whispered thank you in my ear. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Sadie losing her whole family just for being herself. I pulled out my phone again and started looking up local support groups for parents of transgender kids. Maybe I could learn from other parents who'd been through this longer. The next few days passed quietly, but I noticed my son seemed lighter somehow. He laughed more easily and stopped looking so tense every time someone talked to Sadie. My husband mentioned he'd been reading some articles too and wanted to make sure we were doing everything right. We decided to have another coffee date with just Sadie to check in and see how she was feeling about everything. We met at the same coffee shop 3 days later, and I was telling Sadie about how my sons used to roughhouse constantly when they were kids. The words came out before I could stop them when I said she must have had fun wrestling as a boy with her family. Her whole body went stiff, and her coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. My stomach dropped, and I immediately said I meant when she was younger, not as a boy, and I was so sorry for messing up. She set her cup down carefully and said it was okay, but her hands were shaking a little bit. My son reached over and took her hand while I sat there feeling like the worst person in the world. The rest of our coffee was awkward with me trying too hard to act normal, and Sadie barely saying anything else. When I got home, I grabbed my phone and typed out a long text to Sadie saying how sorry I was for my mistake, and that I was trying to learn and would keep getting better. I stared at the message for 5 minutes before hitting send. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with her reply, which was just a heart emoji, and then another message saying my effort to learn meant everything to her. My eyes got watery reading that, and I showed my husband, who patted my shoulder. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making breakfast, and it was my middle son calling earlier than usual. He told me he'd been holding his breath during our whole coffee date, waiting for someone to say something wrong. He said when I messed up, but immediately fixed it and apologized. He felt so grateful that I owned my mistake right away, instead of making excuses. After we hung up, I sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook and started making a simple guide for family gatherings. I wrote down everyone's names with a note to use she and her for Sadie, plus a reminder about respecting everyone's privacy and not asking personal questions. My husband looked over my shoulder and suggested adding a note about not making body comments, which was a good idea. Later that afternoon, my husband called our son and asked if he wanted to help fix the garage door that had been sticking for months. Our son showed up with his toolbox, and they spent 3 hours working on it together. My husband told me later they talked about how to protect the people you love without being too controlling or obvious about it. They figured out the door problem and had a beer afterward, both of them looking more relaxed than I'd seen them in a while. That evening, I sat down with a blank card and wrote Sadie a note about all the specific things I liked about her. I mentioned how sweet she was with our dog, who usually took forever to warm up to people. I wrote about how smart she was and how her eyes lit up when she talked about her research. I said how happy she made my son and how I could see him smiling more since they'd been together. I sealed the envelope and left it on the counter to give her next time. The next morning, my phone started buzzing with notifications from our family group chat. My youngest was complaining about the family guide I'd sent out, saying it was unnecessary, and we didn't need rules for talking to each other. My chest got tight reading his messages, but I took a deep breath before responding. I typed back that making everyone feel comfortable was important, and the guide was just helpful reminders, not strict rules. He sent back more complaints about it being too much, and why did we suddenly need this? My oldest jumped in with a message saying he thought it was a good idea, and everyone could use reminders to be respectful. I put my phone down and called my youngest directly instead of arguing in the group chat. He answered with an annoyed voice asking why we needed a whole guide for family dinners. I explained that making sure everyone felt welcome was important, even if he didn't understand all the reasons yet. I told him it wasn't asking much, just being aware of how we talk to people and making sure nobody felt uncomfortable. He grumbled about it being stupid, but finally said he'd follow the guide if it was that important to me. After we hung up, I felt exhausted from having to justify basic kindness. My phone lit up with a private text from my oldest saying he'd help keep things smooth at the next family gathering and would model good behavior. He said he had my back and would help redirect any weird conversations if needed. Reading his message made me feel less alone in trying to make our family better. I texted back a thank you with a heart, and told him it meant a lot to have his support. Later that evening, when my son stopped by to return a casserole dish, I asked him what name Sadie liked to use with family. He looked surprised by the question, and then his face softened. He said Sadie was perfect, and she'd never mentioned wanting to use anything different, but he was touched that I thought to ask about her preference. He hugged me before leaving and said I was doing great with everything. That night in bed, I kept thinking about how much work it took to make sure one person felt safe and welcomed in our family. 3 days later, I met Sadie at the coffee shop near the bookstore and ordered our usual drinks while she found us a corner table. She kept fidgeting with her coffee sleeve and looking down at the table while I tried to make small talk about the weather. Finally, she looked up and said she had something to tell me about her name. She explained that she actually liked going by Sophia with close family, but had been too scared to correct us when we first met. My chest got warm hearing that she trusted me enough to share this, and I reached across to squeeze her hand. She smiled and relaxed her shoulders while I told her I'd start using Sophia right away. On my drive home, I kept saying Sophia out loud to myself so it would feel natural next time I saw her. When I got home, my husband was watching TV, and I told him about the name change while making lunch. He started practicing too, saying things like pass the salt, Sophia, and how's your day going, Sophia, while we ate our sandwiches. We made it into a little game, working her name into random sentences until it rolled off our tongues easily. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and updated the Family Guide document I'd made with everyone's names and pronouns. I changed Sadie to Sophia everywhere, and added a note at the top saying to use this name going forward. Then I sent it to the family group chat with a simple message about using updated information for future gatherings. My oldest son hearted the message right away while my youngest sent back question marks but didn't argue. I started planning the big family barbecue for next weekend, sketching out a seating chart on notebook paper. I put Sophia between me and my husband where she'd feel protected, and made sure my youngest was at the other end. I wrote down activities like cornhole and volleyball that would keep people busy and moving around instead of sitting and talking too much. The morning of the barbecue, I woke up early to marinate the meat and prep all the side dishes. My oldest son and his wife showed up first to help set up tables and chairs in the backyard. While we arranged everything, I pulled them aside near the garage and asked them to help redirect any awkward conversations that might come up. They both nodded, and my daughter-in-law said she'd been thinking the same thing and would keep an eye out. My oldest said he'd jump in with sports talk or work stories if things got weird. About an hour before everyone else arrived, I practiced greeting Sophia with her name a few more times in the mirror. When their car pulled up, I walked out to meet them in the driveway, giving Sophia a big hug and saying her name clearly. She stood up straighter and smiled wider than I'd ever seen while my son mouthed thank you behind her back. As more family arrived, I introduced Sophia confidently to each person, using her name multiple times so everyone would hear it. My husband's brother shook her hand warmly and started asking about her graduate program, which made her eyes light up. During the volleyball game, my youngest started to say something about girls not being strong enough for certain serves, but my oldest cut him off mid-sentence. He asked loudly about last night's football game and whether anyone saw that incredible touchdown in the fourth quarter. My youngest got distracted arguing about the referee's call, and the moment passed while I let out the breath I'd been holding. About halfway through the afternoon, that same nosy neighbor from before wandered over with his usual boundary issues. He started asking Sophia intrusive questions about her height and whether she played sports in the school. I stepped between them with the serving platter and said firmly that we don't discuss people's bodies at our gatherings. He looked confused and tried to keep talking, but I turned my back and asked Sophia to help me bring out more food. She followed me inside, and we both started laughing once the door closed behind us. When we sat down for dinner, my son grabbed his beer and stood up at the head of the table. He looked right at me and raised his glass, saying thanks, Mom, for everything with this meaningful look in his eyes. I had to blink fast to keep from crying while everyone else raised their drinks too. After we finished eating, Sophia started talking about her graduate research on molecular biology and her plans for getting published. My husband asked real questions about her lab work, and my oldest son's wife wanted to know about the application process. Even my youngest seemed interested when she explained how her research might help develop new medicines. Everyone leaned in to listen while she got more animated and confident with each question. She wasn't hiding behind my son anymore, but sitting up tall and using her hands while she talked. My son kept looking at her with this soft expression, while she explained complex science stuff in ways we could all understand. By the time everyone started leaving, she was hugging people goodbye and making plans to text my daughter-in-law about a book recommendation. That night after cleaning up, I sat on the patio with my husband and we talked about how well everything went. He said Sophia seemed like a completely different person than that first shy dinner, and I agreed she was really becoming herself with us. A few days later, we had another small dinner, and I was talking about taking my sons fishing next weekend when I caught myself and quickly added "and Sophia" to the group invite. She looked up from her plate with this small smile and nodded while my middle son reached over to squeeze her hand under the table. My husband cleared his throat and mentioned there was a big wrestling match on TV next Thursday, and asked if Sophia wanted to come watch it with him and our son. Her whole face changed, and she sat up straighter and started asking about which wrestlers would be fighting while my husband pulled out his phone to show her the lineup. They spent the next 10 minutes going through stats and past matches while my son watched them with this soft look on his face. The following Saturday, we decided to take a family photo in the backyard since everyone was together and looking nice. I started arranging people by height, but then stopped and asked Sophia where she wanted to stand instead of just putting her somewhere. She looked around at everyone and then walked over to stand right next to me, linking her arm through mine while my son stood on her other side. My son caught my eye from his spot and mouthed thank you while the camera timer counted down. After everyone packed up and headed home, I found my son loading the dishwasher and asked him how he really felt about the whole evening. He stopped scrubbing a plate and admitted he'd been scared the whole time that someone would say something wrong or make Sophia uncomfortable, but that he felt like we all protected her together. His voice got thick when he said he never expected us to be this good about everything. Later that night, I pulled out my phone and texted Sophia thanking her for trusting us with who she really is and asking if there was anything we could do better to make her feel welcome. She texted back within minutes saying we were already doing amazing and that she felt lucky to have found our family. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text in the family group chat from my youngest son saying he was sorry for being weird about the pronouns guide and promising he would try harder. My oldest son replied with a thumbs up, and my husband sent a heart emoji while I sat there at the kitchen table feeling proud of all my boys. Over the next month, Sophia started showing up earlier and earlier to family dinners, helping me prep vegetables and telling me about her research while we cooked. She and my husband developed this whole routine where they would debate wrestling moves and technique while setting the table. My middle son would lean against the counter watching us all work together with this peaceful look I hadn't seen on his face since before his ex destroyed him. She started bringing her own apron to keep at our house and knew where everything was in the kitchen without having to ask. At our next big family gathering, I stood at the sink washing dishes and watched through the window as Sophia sat with my daughters-in-law on the patio furniture, all three of them laughing at something on someone's phone. My grandbaby was crawling around their feet and Sophia scooped her up without hesitation, making silly faces that had the baby squealing with joy. My middle son was over by the grill with his dad and brothers, all of them relaxed and joking around while smoke rose from the burgers. My youngest son called something over to Sophia, and she yelled back some joke that made everyone crack up. Standing there with soapy hands and watching my family through that window, I felt this warmth spread through my chest. We didn't just accept Sophia into our family because it was the right thing to do. We genuinely loved her for exactly who she was, and she had made every single one of us better. She taught us to slow down and really see each other, to ask questions instead of assuming, to make space for people to be themselves. My middle son had found someone who helped him heal from all those years of hurt, and we had gained a daughter who fit into our family like she'd always belonged here. Time to close the laptop on this one, folks. Thanks for letting me be your slightly sarcastic commentary companion today.